We will be doing essay 299, which talks about joint audit. So this is a part of chapter 8, and here in joint audit the essay 299, that is joint audit of financial statements, applies. So in this mainly what exactly is covered is how a joint audit is done and what are the provisions regarding it are given in essay 299 regarding documentation, regarding responsibilities, and also with regards to reporting requirements, etc. So this is a very short essay, but it is quite important. Firstly, we will start with what exactly is a joint audit. A joint audit will be an audit which includes two or more auditors for the audit of financial statements. Their objective is to issue an audit report. Now, in the book, firstly, we are given the advantages and disadvantages. However, if we cover it in the end, after we have studied the essay 299, it will be more beneficial as it will make more sense. Now, firstly, we will consider the first part of this essay, which is given in the book, which talks about special considerations while carrying out a joint audit. Now, special considerations are with regards to planning of audit, with regards to documentation, etc. So there are certain points which are given, and each of these points should be covered very nicely. The first point is that the engagement partner and the other key members of the engagement team from each of the joint auditors should be involved in planning the audit. This particularly means that from each of the team of the joint auditors, whichever joint auditors are there, from each of them, the engagement team's engagement partner and other key members should be involved in the planning of the audit. Next part is that the joint auditor should establish the overall audit strategy jointly. That is, both of the joint auditors should jointly establish this overall audit strategy. This audit strategy will set the scope, timing, and direction of audit and also guide the development of the audit plan. So, these first 2 points, as you can see, are with regards to planning and strategy. The first point, which covers that both of the from the joint auditors from each of the engagement team will be involved in the planning of the audit, and secondly that both of them will jointly establish the overall audit strategy, which will set the S, T and D, that is scope, timing and direction of the audit and development, and guide the development of the audit plan. Now the next part, the third point, which is there, it covers that prior to the commencement of the audit, the audit plan, the joint audit plan should be made. And in order to develop this audit plan, there are certain considerations or there are certain things that the joint auditors should consider. Now, this third point is very, very important. It includes certain subpoints, and this comes as a question quite often. Now, the points that these joint auditors in the development of audit plan that they should consider is, firstly, they should identify the division and the common audit areas. So now whatever audit areas are there, they need to identify what audit areas are there. Firstly, they need to define what are the audit areas, they need to divide them, and then they need to identify the common audit areas. So, common audit areas can be various important areas like pending litigations, etc. So, the first thing that they need to consider is they need to firstly identify the division of the audit areas and the common audit areas. Second is they have to decide the reporting objectives of this report. That is, what exactly will be the end goal, ascertain the reporting objectives of the engagement. The third point is that they have to consider and communicate amongst all the joint auditors those factors which are significant in directing the engagement team's efforts. That is, they have to consider what are factors which might be necessary in order to direct the engagement in the right direction, and they also need to communicate that amongst all the joint auditors. So the C part is consider and communicate among all the joint auditors those factors which are significant in directing the engagement team's efforts. Now, the other thing, the fourth thing that they need to consider while developing the audit plan is to consider the results of the preliminary engagement activities. So, there are certain preliminary engagement activities which are there. So, they need to consider the results of that, and also they have to similarly, like any audit engagements, if they have been performed earlier, they have to also consider that. Now, next is the last thing that they need to consider is the nature, timing, and extent of the resources which they require in order to accomplish this engagement. Now, here certain resources which will be required in order to do the audit engagement, and that will be the nature, timing, and extent of it will be considered while they are developing the audit plan. So the 5 things that they need to consider: firstly, identify identify the division of the audit areas and the common audit areas. Secondly, consider the reporting objectives of the engagement. Third, consider and communicate among all joint auditors all those factors which are necessary and significant in directing the engagement team's efforts. Consider the results of the preliminary engagement and other similar engagements which have been performed earlier. And lastly, nature, timing, and extent of the resources which are required to accomplish the engagement. Now, the other special consideration, which is the fourth point, is that each of the joint auditors, now each of these joint auditors will assess the risk of material misstatement, and they will also communicate that with the other joint auditors. It is necessary, in this point it is given that it is necessary for all the joint auditors to do a risk of material misstatements assessment and then communicate that with the other joint auditors. Now, moving on to the next point, which is somehow related to documentation. That is, all the joint auditors will discuss and document what the nature, timing, and extent of the audit procedures for the common as well as specifically allocated areas of the audit to be performed by the joint auditors. So now, the joint auditors, when they do the division of the work, certain areas or certain audit areas will be common and the other audit areas will be specifically allocated to each of the joint auditors. Now, here it is given that the joint auditors will discuss and document the nature, timing, and extent of the audit procedures that they need to perform for the common areas and for the specifically allocated areas. This needs to be done by the joint auditors. Now, the next part is that the joint auditors, they are going to obtain a common engagement letter and a common management representation letter. Now, the engagement letter related stuff is given in SA 210 and management representation letter stuff is given in SA 580. So, these two things are necessary for an audit and they will be obtained jointly by the joint auditors. Now, the last part is that the work allocation document is also made in a joint audit. This work allocation document will be signed by all the joint auditors and it will also be communicated to the TCWG, that is those charged with governance. So, this last part, a work allocation document shall be made and that will be signed by all the auditors and it will also be communicated to those charged with governance. So, up until here, this is a major part of SA 299 which is covered here. Here, one of the questions that is most frequently asked is with regards to what are the factors that they need to consider while developing a common audit plan. So, the 5 points which were there are an important question which might come up. The other things might come up in MCQs, etc. Now, we'll move forward to the responsibilities of the auditors. So, in a joint audit, a big question is that who is responsible for what work. So in this, the joint auditors, they are jointly and severally responsible for certain things which are given here. Now, jointly and severally responsible means that they are jointly as a group. Joint auditors, all the joint auditors are responsible and also individually they are responsible for certain things. Now, what are these things? And it also becomes a very important question. The first thing is the audit work which is not divided and which is carried out by all of the joint auditors. For example, regarding pending litigations. So that is something which is not divided and allocated specifically, but it is carried out by all the joint auditors together. So they are jointly and severally responsible for this. Second is that the decisions which are taken by the joint auditors under audit planning in respect of common audit areas. That is, when they are deciding the nature, timing, and extent of the common audit areas, when the decisions regarding that is being taken, that is the common, regarding the common audit areas, that is the responsibility of the joint auditors jointly and severally. Now, Thirdly, the matters which are brought to the notice of the joint auditors by one of them, and an agreement among the joint auditors is there on such matters. This particularly means that if one of the joint auditors brings something of relevance to the notice of all the other joint auditors, and there is an agreement by other joint auditors on that particular matter, then they all become responsible jointly and severally on this. Now, the last 3 points are with regards to compliances. So, first point here, this point states that examining the financial statements of the entity, they comply with the relevant statute. Next is that presentation and disclosure of financial statements, which is required by the applicable financial reporting framework. So these 2 points are regarding financial statements. The first one is that they comply with the financial statements should comply with the relevant statute, and the next point states that the presentation and disclosure of financial statements should be as per the applicable financial reporting framework. The next part is, and the last one is, that the audit report should be complying with the relevant statutes, the applicable standards, and the pronouncement by ICAI. So these are the areas for which they are jointly and severally responsible. Now, for each joint auditor will only be responsible for the work he is allocated. So when the work allocation is done to a particular joint auditor, he will only be responsible for his work, and he will also ensure that there is a proper execution of the audit procedures. He will not be responsible for a specific work which is allocated to another joint auditor. However, they are responsible for the things that we just discussed with regards to common audit areas or presentation of financial statements, etc., for which every joint auditor is responsible jointly. Now, separate responsibility is there to determine the nature, timing, and extent of the audit procedures that need to be applied to the work which is allocated to the auditor. And secondly, the auditor is responsible for the proper execution of these audit procedures related to the work which is allocated to him. Only and only for this he is responsible individually. Now, lastly, I will discuss the conclusion and reporting. So now, the joint auditors are required to issue a common audit report. This part is quite important, and it states that they are required to issue a common audit report. However, there are cases in which there might be a disagreement. So in the case of a disagreement among the auditors about any of the matters in audit report or any opinion, then they will express their opinion in a separate audit report. A separate audit report will be made with regards to if there is any disagreement and they are having different opinions. Now, a very important thing which is there in this essay, which it states that joint auditors is not bound by the views of the majority of joint auditors when it comes to matters of the audit report. Now, this particularly means that a joint auditor, if the majority of the joint auditors have a particular opinion and a one single joint auditor does not match his opinion with them, he is not bound to follow that majority opinion when it comes to matters specifically regarding the audit report opinion. So if anything needs to be stated by a joint auditor which is not in agreement with the other joint auditors, he can establish a separate audit report. Here, one of the major requirements when a separate audit report is established is that audit reports of each of the joint auditors will make a reference to the specific audit report which are there in the other matters paragraph. Now, I hope this is clear. Now, this is pretty much it about what exactly the reporting is and how it's documented the responsibilities. Now we are also given certain advantages and disadvantages. These advantages and disadvantages can be understood from whatever we have learned in essay 299. So the advantages are that there will be a common expertise, sharing of the expertise which might be there in this. Then we have also the ability to consult mutually. Next is the workload will be lower. If it is a very big company, then the workload will be divided. The quality of performance because of that will improve. Then the service to the client will be of a better quality. Now, the staff development cost, because there are multiple joint auditors which have their own expertise, the staff development costs will be lower and the cost of work will also be lower. Now, what exactly are the disadvantages? So the disadvantages which are most important is that there might be problems with the coordination. There can also be problems with the superiority complex with some auditors, which might be better. Then the fees will be distributed amongst the joint auditors. Then, apart from that, the areas of work which are of common interest might get neglected. Now, there can be uncertainty with regards to the liability of the work done, as we might not be able to trace it. Now, in the last part of this, it is mentioned that each auditor will be entitled to assume that the work by the other joint auditors has been carried out by them and the work has been performed as per the essays. Now, lastly, if a joint auditor comes across a matter which might be relevant to the area of other auditors or require any disclosure judgment of the other joint auditors, then he will communicate that with the other joint auditors in a writing, which is in a writing prior to the completion of audit. So this means that a joint auditor, if he has anything which might be of relevance to the other auditor, in writing he will communicate that with the other auditors before the completion of the audit. Thank you.